everybody. Welcome again to Relationship Refresh. This is week 2. My name is Ben Johnson. I'm one of the pastors at Gloria Lutheran Church in Urbandale, Iowa. And as I mentioned in the first video, there's so many changes that are happening in our world and in our economies and in our churches and schools and jobs and in our relationships that it's so important to take time to invest in your relationships. I remember a story when I was doing my interviews right before I was going to become a pastor. And the question that they asked me was what is something in your life that you worked really, really hard on and that you take a lot of pride in? Man, I really took me a long time to think that one through. And I'm like, I don't know, my jump shot. I'm good at Miss Pac-Man. I don't know. I've just thought through a lot of these things. Well, finally, it settled on me. I said, one thing that I'm take a lot of pride in is my marriage. And I've read a lot of books, and my wife and I have done a lot of counseling and different things and enrichment seminars and different things just to keep that relationship healthy and thriving. And so it's so important that we are investing energy and time into our relationships to keep them healthy and strong. Now, in week 2 here, we're going to be talking about the value in our differences and really talking through the nature of personalities. Man, everyone is so different, aren't they? I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about humanity is everyone is so unique and so different. Everyone has different preferences, personalities, different humor, from the foods they eat to where they like to go on vacation to the coffee they drink or if they drink coffee. Everyone is so different. And now you might have heard the saying that goes, that opposites attract. Opposites attract. In some ways, it's kind of true, but on a very deep level, especially as we start talking about relationships, it's not true. So I'm going to debunk this one real quick. Opposites don't attract. That's not the thing that actually attracts people or bonds people together in a relationship. In fact, the thing that is actually the attractant from a person to a person is their character. Character attracts. Character is what bonds. Have you ever had someone in your life that was in a certain kind of relationship? Let's say it was a bad relationship and they broke up with that person. Then they started dating someone that was a lot like that last person, or that cycle continues, right? Or have you ever noticed in your relationship that you end up marrying someone or being in a relationship with someone that's a lot like the family you grew up in sometimes, right? Well, it's because character attracts character. We're attracted to that, right? A certain worldview, certain ways of treating people, certain ways of, whether it be your humor, the way that you are just wired as a person. Character attracts character. It's the bonding agent of a relationship. The differences are like the spices that make it unique. They're the spices that add some creativity and flair to the relationship. So the differences are to be celebrated and cherished. But you need to know what the differences are. There's nothing worse than trying to make a really good dish and putting too much cayenne pepper in it, or putting too much of this or too much of that. A little bit of salt is good. Too much? Ugh, right? And that's what I see in a lot of relationships. It's good to have differences. It's good to have differences in your personality. But you got to understand what those differences are so that times you need to temper it back, times you need to push it forward to create the right amount in the relationship. And we're looking at the value in those differences in our time together. Now, one of the areas that I find a lot of couples are disconnected on is the difference between introversion and extroversion. Now, a lot of the stuff that I learned on this particular topic came from a book entitled The Introvert Advantage. Introvert Advantage. And in this book, it says how quiet people can thrive in an extrovert world. This is a must read for anyone that I do premarital counseling with. must read. Introvert advantage. I very rarely have met a couple where one person does not have more introverted tendencies. And so to be able to understand the introverted personality, you're going to have to do a little bit of reading and some research, but it is worthwhile. Let me tell you briefly the history of this book in my life. My sister-in-law was the first to get it, and she's more introverted. As she read it, she was openly moved by the information. Like, I finally understand myself. Then she gave it to my wife, who read it, who then proceeded to give it to me and said, you have to read this, right? And I'm like, why do I need to read this, right? This is about you. And she gave me, the look only a wife can give, this one where it's like, and I'm like, all right. And I read this book. Halfway through the first chapter, I'm like, babe, is this how you really are? Is this how you think? Is this how you act? And she's like, yeah. It was mind-blowing. It was like peering into the soul of my wife. I started realizing that a lot of our dumb fights in the first year or two of marriage, I just didn't understand the difference between introversion and extroversion. Now, introversion and extroversion, it doesn't have anything to do with your social IQ. It's not how well you interact with other people, okay? You can have people that are socially awkward introverts, socially awkward extroverts. It doesn't have anything to do with that. Introversion, extroversion primarily has to do with how a person regains energy and how we process information. How we regain energy and how we process information. A couple interesting factoids about from a more introverted personality, and these come from the Introvert Advantage book. But the difference between introversion and extroversion, and an introvert has an allotment of words they can use in a given day, and it usually hovers around 30 to 40,000. Right around that 35 to 40,000 words, it's like, I'm done. I'm like cut off. And an extrovert, they find, has unlimited words. They could just keep going. So when two extroverts hang out, have you noticed they can just talk, and then they get to the end of their night together and it's like, that was awesome. Whereas an introvert, if they were in that, they would hit the end of the night and be like, I'm exhausted, right? I need to regain. That was a lot of energy I just put out. There's lots of fun little factoids that an introvert has a narrower window of temperature regulation. They'll feel too hot or too cold much quicker, whereas an extrovert has a wider gap where they feel kind of good with the temperature. The amount of sleep needed. They find that an extrovert actually needs less sleep to feel fully recharged, but if they don't get that amount of sleep, they don't act very good. Whereas an introvert needs more sleep to be fully recharged, but if they don't get their full allotment of sleep, it's not as bad, right? How people go into a party, how they hang out with other people. Extroverted people tend to go to the middle of the party, right to the heart of the action. Whereas an introvert tends to want to go around the edges. They want to scope it out. They want to get a sense of things before they just dive right in, right? How we deal with distractions when it comes to when we're focusing or when we're working on something or we're focused on something. That for an introvert, well, usually when they lock into a project or you're working on something and you're really putting a lot of deep energy into it, to be distracted out of that takes energy to come out. It's like, whoa, what? Right? It takes more energy, whereas an extroverted personality tends to be able to bounce around from thing to thing, but it's also harder for an extrovert personality to go deeper into one particular thing. And there's lots of other things. I would really recommend getting that book. But some of the major ones that are really going to pertain, those were kind of the fun ones. Some of the major ones, though, that we're going to talk through, common introverted traits are that someone who's more introverted is going to prefer time of solitude or time with 2 or 3 people that really get them. Right? I want you to think about it like a Lego pieces, okay? You have all the different size pieces, and that's the uniqueness of humanity. Everyone's kind of different. An introvert is more that 4 to 6, piece where once they're kind of stuck on and they have their relationships, they're like, I'm good. Like, I don't need any more. And many times extroverts are more like that big piece, but the little grooves aren't as deep. So they can kind of stick to a lot of people and they always feel like they have room for more. But the relationships don't tend to go as deep as they do with someone who's more introverted. The introverts don't really prefer to be the center of attention. They don't really want to be spotlighted or called out. They tend to think before they speak. They're not as talkative. And this is a big one, is that it has to do more with how they're processing information. An introvert, by and large, internally processes what they're going to say, whereas an extrovert will process that information externally. So for instance, if I asked your opinion on something and I wanted you to think through your opinion on a certain topic, an introvert is going to think 3 paragraphs, and then what they say is what they mean. They had to think it through and then they say it. So they need space and time to formulate that idea. Whereas an extrovert, it needs to talk out loud or write or work through that 3 paragraphs, and they don't really know what they mean until it's the last thing, right? Now, that alone causes an unbelievable amount of disconnection in any relationship, is just the ability of processing information internally or externally. Like when something comes up in your relationship, the extrovert's like, I want to talk about it right now. I want to talk about it, and they're working it through and they're da-da-da-da-da. Whereas the introvert's like, whoa, I just need a moment to think so that I can know what I'm thinking about. And the extrovert's like, no, tell me now. And they're spotlighting them and tell me now. And the introvert's sitting here like, oh my gosh, now now you're feeling defensive and fight or flight's starting to come up. And it's like, I either need to fight or run, right? Well, nothing productive happens. Right? And so it's that ability to understand ourselves and our differences and how we process information is very different between introverts and extroverts. The working in quiet or independent environments, focusing on specific interests, or the looking more reserved. Right? As people now have been allocated to working from home, for some people this is so incredibly difficult, and you need to really think this through in your relationship. Some people, they really need a space where they can go deeper into thought without being distracted all the time. But now with kids having to do school from home, or you're homeschooling, or things are all up in the air, man, I know this can be incredibly difficult. That's why you need to have these conversations in the relationship. Now, extroverts tend to really kind of the opposite of what we just said, but they usually like larger social networks. They don't mind being the center of attention or being spotlighted. They tend to think out loud, more externally processing. They make quicker decisions. Introverts tend to be really good researchers. They like to pull in all the data, but actually pulling the trigger on something, that's stressful. Whereas extroverts tend to not do as much research and yeah, just do that. And so if you can pair up an introvert and an extrovert, especially on decision making, that can be wonderful. In my marriage, it's my wife doing the research, getting our 3 to 4 best options, bringing them to me, and I go, that one. And that's usually how it works in our relationship. But, it works. Extroverts tend to be a little more outgoing or enthusiastic. They like more team-oriented or open work settings, collaboration, and things of that nature. Now, again, this is not to say introverts don't like people or working together or that, but they enjoy the structure. It was funny in the last video when I brought up those 5 questions, the daily dialogue for couples. Man, introverts love that structure. Every time I do marriage or pre-marriage counseling and I bring up the daily dialogue with the 5 things, it's the introverts that are like, give it to me. Because otherwise, how does it go in your marriage or in your relationship? How does it work? It's usually somebody saying, how do you feel? Tell me now. And they're spotlighting them to be like, give me everything right now. And you're like, I haven't even thought this out. But to have guiding questions that work you through your feelings and things that are going on, that can be very helpful. Now, there's no way we can cover the full range of this. So again, I highly recommend Introvert Advantage, and get that. It's a great read, a must read, and it's a really good one. Now, as we look at this, we also remember that Jesus was perfect humanity, which means Jesus was a perfect extrovert and a perfect introvert. And you see the extroverted and the introverted tendencies of Jesus throughout his public ministry and in his life. I want to share with you 6 different times Jesus chose solitude over people and why he did that. In Luke 4, right before Jesus is preparing for a major task, which was he was going to be baptized and then he's going to sent into the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by Satan, we see Jesus pulling off into solitude to make sure he was in the right space for what he was about to do. So before you prepare for a major task, Jesus went off into solitude. In Mark 6:30-32, Jesus just sent the 12 disciples out to do ministry, and when they returned, he encouraged them to separate from the people to get some rest, so to recharge after hard work. That Jesus would promote solitude, pulling away from people, recharge the batteries. After Jesus learned in Matthew 14:1-13, that his cousin John the Baptist had died, been beheaded, it says Jesus went off by himself to grieve. So to work through grief, Jesus chose solitude. In Luke 6:12-13, early in Jesus' ministry, before he was about to choose the 12 disciples, the 12 men who were going to carry the message of the gospel to the ends of the earth, Jesus went off into solitude to pray. So before making important decisions, we also see in Luke 22 of that same gospel that hours before Jesus was arrested in the Mount of Olives, he was praying in solitude with the Father. And this was really in time of distress, in times when we're going through a lot or something really heavy is happening in our life. It can be important. Now notice, in times of solitude, he's not just sitting there twiddling his thumbs though, okay? Jesus is always in community. It's just those times of solitude was he needed to pull away from the people so he could connect with his Father. For Christians, this is an important thing to remember. We all need solitude in prayer. Anytime this much stress and anxiety and change happens in an individual's life, the amount of good things, good rituals, good habits have to increase. And for Christians, we have to increase our amount of abide time that we have in our focus on prayer. And that's really in Luke 5, the focus on prayer that Jesus had was just incredible. Luke 5:12-16, I want to read this one for you. Luke 5:12-16 says, while Jesus was in one of the cities, there came a man full of leprosy. And when he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and begged him, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand, touched him, and said, I will, be clean. Immediately the leprosy left him, and he charged him to tell no one, but go show yourself to the priest, make an offering for your cleansing as Moses commanded for a proof to them. But now even more, the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. But he would withdraw to a desolate place and pray. So it's so important to see that as we sink into these different aspects, that it's important to find solitude in our prayer. Now, I want to bring to you something that is just really helpful, and this is a fun exercise, and it's called the dating exercise, all right? You're going to find this one posted online. Really recommend. You're going to need 2 again. Download them, print off 2 copies, one for each of you. And if you really want to help keep that relationship thriving and alive and growing, the best advice is to date your partner. Date them. So interesting in a dating relationship, when you first meet that person, the extremes you go to, because you always have in the back of your mind you could lose them. So you got to always be on the top of your game. And all of a sudden people get married and you put the ring on, and some of that dating flair kind of falls off over time. Man, I'm here to tell you, you got to do this. And I know it's hard right now, but you have to find time to date your spouse. And so in order, though, to have dates and time together that work for both people, what you're going to do is you're going to work through your differences to create the perfect dates for you and your spouse. Okay? So on the dating exercise, you're going to think through separately, writing down answers to these questions of, as you think about the life of your relationship, what have been your favorite dates? And you're just going to write out, what have been your favorite times together? What do you enjoy doing together? Sports, hobbies, interests, recreational activities, what's even open right now, right? I mean, you got to think through those things, but what have been your favorites? Okay? And what are some things you would like to learn or pursue together? Are there things you could do together? Things that you could pursue together that would be meaningful? And again, you're just brainstorming. This is personally what you're doing. And then you're going to write down on here. Now, at the end of this section, you're going to come back with your partner. You're going to share with them what you put in this section. And you're going to have all of these different things brainstormed out of potential dates that would work for you. Now, your partner's also going to have 5. So you're going to have 10, but on the back, you got to take those 10 and now narrow them back down to 5. Only do it together. Okay? So you're going to take the 10 brainstormed ideas that both of you came up with, and you got to create, and you're going to work through how much time do they require, how much finances do they require, how much energy does it require, is it open, can you do it with everything happening social distance, or whatever it might be. And you're going to plan out 5 dates. 5 dates. Then you're going to pull out your calendars and you're going to plan those dates. When are you going to go on the date? Remember, it's only as good as it gets on the calendar, okay? Then you're going to put that on the calendar, and then you're going to go and you're going to have a lot of fun with your partner. You're going to remember again why you're married to them, why you love them, why you would give your life for them. You're going to remember how fun they are, and you're going to go out and just have a good time with your partner and refresh the relationship as you value the differences that each of you bring to the relationship. Okay? Now, in our time together next time, what we're going to be working through is the reality of God's plan of making our homes a place of grace and service. We're going to be looking at the reality that God is love, and He's designed us to be sacrificial in the way that we give and receive love from other people. And we're going to work through the 5 love languages, and we're going to work through what our languages are, how are they to be used, and kind of the power behind those. So I look forward to our time together in week 3, and thank you for being a part of week 2 of Relationship Refresh. We'll see you next time.